So my psychologist is a Japanese Buddhist, by the way. And we tried meditation. I meditate in like 3 seconds and I'm done. Because I told you, my brain goes really fast. Okay, I've meditated now. Okay, what's next? Right? No, you need to breathe. I breathed. What's next? And he just goes on this thing. And so we kind of gave up on the meditation thing. But what I do practice is I do practice stillness, which I think he tricked me into meditating without calling it meditating. But the practice part is kind of what I want to segue off on for a little bit, because that's what recovery is, and that's what change is, frankly. Changing anything is just repeating something until it becomes a habit, right? If you want to replace a habit, the first thing is you have to stop the habit. The second thing is you'll go back to that habit if you don't replace it with something different, right? So practice. I'm going to take a rabbit hole for a second, man, because I like me some rabbit holes.
Wascally Wabbit.
That's exactly Wascally Wabbit. So the first time I went to a meeting, period, right, not counting the fact I went to rehab when I was 15, which I never, yeah, exactly. You didn't know that, did you? I'd rather talk about. So the first time I went to a meeting, so I went and told my doctor I couldn't stop drinking. And they said, hey, why don't you try this inpatient? I said, well, I don't have time. I have a job, because, everybody doesn't have time to go to inpatient. So he was kicking around a couple different meetings. And I said, well, I'm not really into that. And he goes, well, why don't you try this thing called SMART? And so I go to a SMART meeting on Monday night. It's pretty funny. SMART's like group therapy. So it's like going to a group therapy meeting, except I didn't know I was going to a group therapy meeting. And so they give me a little intro. This is what SMART is. And then they go around, they do a check-in. Like, hey, I'm so-and-so. This is my issues. This is what I had last week. I have it coming up this next week. I'm like, and then I start sweating, and it gets around the room to me, and I'm sitting there going, I am supposed to tell a room full of complete strangers that I've never met about my weaknesses, right? And it didn't make any sense to me, but I've learned how to do that, right? I've learned how to do that over time to such a point now that it's like I'll just like vomit my insecurities all over people just because, hey, guess what? And more or less as a challenge, but also for myself. But what's interesting is, and I love watching people evolve when they get into recovery and start going to groups and get into mental health, and they can actually start figuring out that, gee, the more that I'm honest and the more that I tell people about this stuff, the more that I realize that there's all sorts of people that are just like me, not alone. But back to the practice thing, right? It took me a long time, I would say probably around a year, of going to meetings. I went to inpatient finally, and to where I really felt honest, like I was actually truly being honest, not saying something for the sake of saying something, or saying something for the sake of making a point with somebody else, right? But literally to start by saying, these are my insecurities, these are my weaknesses, these are the things that I struggle with today. Anybody have any thoughts on that? And what's really neat is getting that feedback. Anyways, so it takes a long time, right? It takes a long time for us to become conditioned and addicted to substances or behaviors, and it takes a long time to be unconditioned and reconditioned to do something else. But listen, it can be done, right? I'm not somebody that ever sat in a circle and talked about their feelings, to the point of, crying, which I do every other year maybe. So, but it's, it was something at the end of the day that I learned how to do, and you can learn how to do pretty much anything. And so the fact is, learning how to do something different than your addictive or destructive behavior is completely possible. And there's people that have done that before, and there's people that are doing it now. So